So, we're going to be talking about active listening today. And I like to say that active listening is the most deceptively simple thing. You're going to be like, well, we all know how to do that. However, this skill is absolutely crucial, required to be able to have effective communication and have successful conflict resolution. And what happens is when we're in these high stress meeting environments and maybe we're starting to feel flustered or we're starting to feel pressure, we kind of lose these active listening skills. So, our hope today is to really clearly talk about what is active listening, what do these different skills look like, but also practice them enough that they just kind of become second nature. And then, more importantly, at the end, we're going to talk about how to translate this to your staff. So, John is going to kick us off with what is active listening.
Yeah, and you can actually be thinking about what are some characteristics of a good listener. I'm probably going to touch on that here in this opening slide, but as Ashley mentioned, active listening is in some ways a very simple concept, but in other ways it is really an essential element of all of the interactions that we're involved with if we are truly trying to effectively communicate with another person. When we think about active listening and the skills associated with it's not just about hearing someone else, but it's also about understanding what it is that that person is saying. There is a big difference between hearing someone talk and actually understanding what it is that they're trying to communicate. And so that is what makes active listening essential, and really why we were focusing on this particular topic today and then in September with your staff. Active listening is not just looking at the things that are being said or the facts of any given interaction, but it's also a way that we can incorporate a recognition of feelings or things that might not are being expressly communicated, verbally anyway. When we do this correctly, and this is the key point, this is why it's important in the work that you do and in the work that your teachers do. When we are able to effectively, actively listen, we are putting ourselves in a position where we can reduce tension and we can reduce defensiveness. And when you find yourself in some of the meetings that y'all are accustomed to participating in, there can be a bit of tension or a bit of defensiveness just as a rule based on the reason that you're getting together. And so one of the goals of active listening is doing things that are going to allow us to reduce the tension and the defensiveness that is generally present in these interactions. And then finally, active listening includes both verbal and nonverbal skills, not just what is being said, but sometimes what isn't being said. And then there's that other area of communication that makes up about 85% of how we communicate anyway, and that is by the actions that we take. So that'll lead us into the next slide. And I think Ashley will talk a little bit about what some of the nonverbals are, because both verbal and nonverbal skills are required to effectively, actively communicate.
So, we're going to talk about nonverbal, and some of these are going to be really familiar. Some of them you may never have considered being part of nonverbal skills. But what I'd like you to do is use the chat box and kind of as we look at these skills together and look at what they encompass, notice what you think your staff could use some help with. So notice what your teachers may not be aware are nonverbal skills, or there may be nonverbal skills that they're not using as effectively in these meetings, so that we can know for when we're training your teachers, but also so we can talk about it today. So the first one is one that I think everybody knows. It's that body posture. And I think a lot about how we sit in meetings day after day, and maybe we stop paying as much attention to that body posture, or maybe we're just really uncomfortable from being in those chairs, but that does send a message. The next is facial expressions. Who on here, show of hands, has a staff member that has what is known as RBF? And if you don't know what that means, I'm not going to tell you, but who has a staff member that does know what that means, that just always looks like they're grumpy or always looks like they're mad? So I think I saw a few hands for the facial expressions. So we have some staff members that are the nicest, most caring people, but their nonverbals that they're not even aware of send a certain message, right? That maybe they're not being as receptive or they're not listening. The gestures we make and our amount of eye contact. Some of the things that we're going to do today in our breakout room may come back to these things that we're not even thinking about, but that are sending really clear messages to the families that we work with, who all come from different cultures, from different backgrounds, from different families, and may really take um, a lot of eye contact or a lack of eye contact to mean something. Touch is a huge nonverbal skill and really something that some people are very comfortable with, right? We all have that person that's a hugger. Maybe you have a family that every time they come to the school, their mom is hugging every single person from the front desk to all the teachers. And then we have other people that are like their personal bubble is maybe 10 feet. They need a lot of that distance and that space. So being aware that when we're within somebody's personal space, or if we touch them, even if it's a passing touch as we're like trying to scoot by them, that is a type of communication. And a lot of it is impacted by their own culture and by their own backgrounds. And so if we can bring awareness to that and how these are coming across to the different people we work with, that can be really powerful. The use of space. So I like to say that I have been to many IEP meetings. And I think I talked about it last time where it was like almost like, how there's like a one side of the wedding party on one side and one side of the wedding party on the other side at weddings, but it's almost like that at IEP meetings. Like this is our side of the table, this is your side of the table. And when we automatically create that otherness, we're not creating that togetherness. And I think that that can be really, really tough
Mhm.
in a meeting. And then this is one we miss a lot is that interested silence. I like to say I'm the worst therapist because I'm not great at silence. But giving people that space to talk, being really interested in what they're saying instead of going through the motions and checking off something, all of that goes into our nonverbal skills. And these are part of active listening. But I think that John is going to tell us a little bit more about um, the talking part of active listening next.
Yeah, and I mean, we're going to jump into an activity right now, and there will be an assigned breakout room that I guess you will go to. But kind of in a lead up to this activity, and the question is going to be: think of 3 common behaviors that you see school staff engage in during an IEP meeting. To kind of give you an example of this, I want you to picture if you've ever worked in a classroom, okay? Picture some of the behaviors that you might see students engaged in. An example would be maybe a student that's kind of gazing out the window, or maybe a student that is doodling on a sheet of paper. And as a teacher, or maybe some kind of support person, we can start to attribute meaning to what it is that they're doing, right? We can look at that behavior and then we can start developing perceptions about why that's occurring, maybe what they're trying to do or what they're not trying to do, as an example. So, and maybe another example would be if you have a significant other and you're wanting to engage in a conversation with them, and maybe you see them doing some other activity, or maybe they're looking down at their watch as if they have a more important place to be, or maybe they're playing a game on their phone, something like that. That communicates a message. Okay, so with that kind of understanding, what are some common behaviors that school staff could very easily engage in during an IEP meeting? And then for each of those behaviors, see if you can come up with 2 different ways that either the visiting family or the student that's present in that meeting could perceive those behaviors. Okay. I think we're going to go to our breakout rooms, and we'll have a quick conversation, maybe come back in a few minutes. Awesome. So one of the things that came up in our breakout room was people being on the computer that weren't taking notes, right? That was one of the observable behaviors. And so the perception there could be the meeting isn't important, or even worse, by extension, the student isn't important, right?
Mhm.
And then one of the other messages, and I thought that this was uh, a really a really perceptive answer, is that the family might see this person as being secretive, like they're taking notes that aren't on things that aren't being communicated. And
Mm,
especially if the parent or the student has had a negative IEP meeting experience in the past, then that might be their expectation going into this. And there could really be a breakdown in communication there just by somebody being on their computer. And then another one was difficulty with silence, right? And how we try to pull things out of the student, and it can be seen as berating, or it can just make communication all the more difficult because we don't allow adequate time for silence. So, really great, great answers.
One of the reasons I did this activity is because when I joined the school system coming from community mental health, and I started going to these meetings, and I noticed people, on laptops a lot in person meetings or on virtual meetings over COVID, people were just almost checking out or off camera. And I noticed how it was impacting people's responses. And it sounds like y'all have seen that as well. So now we're going to talk about common verbal skills. Encouragement is awesome. It is they can be verbal and nonverbal skills that encourage someone to continue talking. So we have like our nonverbal head nods, but we also have our or please tell me more, or I want to know more about that. And how often are we remembering to say that to our students, to our parents, and even to our teachers, where we go, "Ooh, yeah, tell me more. I want to know more about how this looks for you." Questions are those things that help us gather information and check for understanding, but it does not always work if we're like just pouring out information and asking questions without actually giving people time to sit with that information and really respond. Then we have restating, which is really just using your own words. You're checking to make sure you understood the content. Reflecting, which we're going to talk more about, but that's really about not only restating the content, but the feelings and the emotion behind the message. Because at the end of the day, how we're all feeling about something really has a huge impact on the outcome of meetings. Summarizing is pulling everything together, and you probably, some of you are great at the end of IEP meetings at summarizing. Some of you may feel like, oh, sometimes that was an impossible meeting to summarize because we started at point A and we ended up at point Y, and we went like around the world in between. So that's a skill to develop. And then really validating. And this is something that us therapists use a lot. And I promise you, if you're doing this as a therapist, people are going to keep coming back to you. If you're doing this as a program specialist, your families and your teachers are going to feel supported. If you're doing this with your loved ones in your personal life, just somebody recognizing and validating somebody's experience. Doesn't mean you have to agree, doesn't mean you have to have 100% lived that same life or understand, but just validating somebody's experience can be so powerful. And when people feel heard, they are going to leave a meeting, they're going to leave a situation feeling a lot better than if they feel like, wow, nobody even gets what I'm saying. People cannot get their way, but as long as they felt understood, they are feeling good. So
Mhm.
now we're going to talk more about that reflection we mentioned before.
Yeah, Ashley mentioned reflection, and I think just the how powerful it is to feel like you are seen and you are heard and you are understood, and there is a connection that is made there that will allow for things to be accomplished both through interactions and meetings and decision makings that wouldn't otherwise be accomplished. Um, uh, Sometimes we can feel that there is an adversarial relationship that exists, especially when parents come in and they've had a negative experience. And so one of the dynamic and powerful things about reflection is it allows us to really connect with them and show them that we are seeing them, we're hearing them, and either we're understanding them or we are making an extreme effort to understand what it is that they are seeing and feeling. And so, one way that we do that is through mirroring. And mirroring basically is a concept where we are focused on repeating the specific language that the parent is using. Um, the specific language part is key because if you start inserting words that you think it to mean, that might not be accurate. And so That's more on the paraphrasing side, which we're going to get to in a minute. But as you mirror something, you're wanting to make sure that the speaker communicated exactly what it was that they were attempting to communicate. Now, on the paraphrasing side, that's where you are using your own words to communicate your understanding of what you heard. Okay. It allows for everybody to be on the same page, but this is also an opportunity where if there's a disconnect, maybe if through mirroring the parent communicated something in a way that they didn't intend to, or through paraphrasing, right? You maybe heard something or interpreted it that wasn't exactly how the message that the parent was trying to communicate. Those are two safeguards that allow us to kind of take care of what could be a big problem and allow you to move forward within your meeting. I have a pastor friend that does this really, really well. And I can say that there have been times where I'm talking to him, and there are 50 people in the room, and I feel like I'm the only one there. I'm the only one that he sees. He is tuned in to what I'm saying. He is really just kind of mirroring what it is he's getting from me. And it's just a powerful feeling, and it's a very validating feeling to put yourself out there and communicate in such a way and that someone just kind of gets it. And so that's just an example in my life where I've just really been on the receiving end of it, and it's been extremely beneficial. The benefits, to kind of continue on the slide, number one, and I touched on this, it ensures accuracy. If there is an inaccurate communication or an inaccurate understanding, finding that out sooner rather than later is key. Probably an even more beneficial element of this is it creates a positive relationship, or it creates a connection. You go from adversarial to being on the same team. In addition, it avoids misunderstandings, and it helps the listener to ensure that they understand things that are being communicated well, and maybe things that were miscommunicated by the speaker. And then finally, it allows the speaker to make sure that their message is heard. Ashley mentioned that these meetings sometimes are a bit stressful and tense, and we've all probably fallen victim to not really communicating in a way that we wanted to when we feel that all eyes are on us. Every time I do a training, within 10 minutes after, I'm like, man, I wish I'd communicated it this way instead of that way. I think it's just kind of a human nature thing. But by reflecting through mirroring and paraphrasing in these meetings, you are going to give that parent or that student another opportunity to clarify something that might be a really important point for them.
So there's a few things you can do to get good at reflection. It's not easy. It seems easy on paper. It seems really easy when we're talking about it. I always feel like I'm great about it. Here's how to know when you really need to work on it. Think about the last argument you got into with a loved one. Let's make it a little personal. Do you feel like you, in that moment, were doing a good job reflecting not only the content of what your loved one was saying, but their feelings behind it? Some of you, maybe yes, maybe you're already awesome at reflection. I know for me, when I'm in the middle of an argument, say with my husband, maybe I am more in my emotional state than my thinking state, and I may be missing things. So, what we want to do is pay attention to those cues, verbal and nonverbal, always restate and clarify. We're going to look at feelings, but not only feelings. We want to know about the intensity of the feelings. So, how to do that is one, familiarize yourself more with feeling vocabulary in general. There's some awesome handouts that exist for free online that talk about the intensity of anger, from annoyance and frustration all the way to feeling irate, angry. And those are really important to be able to adequately reflect to somebody. Because if somebody is really, really angry and I say, oh, you're annoyed, I'm not actually getting their message correct, right? Like I am thinking that they're still here and they're already way up there. So that's something to familiarize yourself with, and maybe even help your staff learn. You want to be natural and use simple terms. So you don't want to get too formal. You don't want to not be yourself. You want to be genuine in your reflection. So if you wouldn't normally use a word or say something, don't try to put it in there because you feel like you need to. Really be true to yourself, because when you come across genuine, that's a powerful thing in and of itself. And then you want to be non judgmental and non directive. You don't want to add to the message. You don't want to add to what they've said. We're not putting words in their mouth. We're not telling them how they feel. We're really just reflecting what they're experiencing.
Yeah, and if I could kind of piggyback on that too, I think the with reflection, it's kind of a seeking first to understand, right? If there's any Stephen Covey fans out there, seek first to understand, then to be understood. A lot of times we will get in situations like that, and like whether it's a negative interaction with a peer, maybe it's a kind of a tense interaction with a parent in an IEP meeting, or a fight with a spouse, or whatever, and we can become so focused on getting our point across, or we can listen kind of with the intent to reply rather than the intent to understand, and we miss the message. And so reflection is going to allow us to avoid those types of interpersonal landmines. And I think on this next slide, we have an example, kind of a real world thing. Maybe y'all have encountered something similar to this, but I want you to think about which of the responses below best uses reflection. And then, as you can see, Ashley moving her cursor, there's a text box where you can click on that, and you can put an X either in option A or in option B to show which one you feel is the best use of reflection. Now, here's the scenario. Okay, a parent says, "I thought I would hear from the teacher a lot more often than I am. All I get are automated messages about progress or missing assignments." Which of the responses do you feel like best uses reflection? Option A, well, ma'am, those automated messages let you know what your student is missing or where they're behind. Our teachers can't call about every assignment. Or option B, you feel that you could use more communication about what your student is behind on. Which one best utilizes reflection?
Right. We see some answers popping up.
Yep,
And
for
this one's
option B.
pretty easy, but I use it because it's a great example of what we often go to within the school system. One, because there's an element of we want to make sure that they know that we've done everything we can, right? But also, it is human nature to almost start defending ourselves when we feel attacked. But when we can sit there and do option B instead, we can have a really powerful conversation. Option A, that's going to keep the parent on the defensive because they're already feeling like you have not done enough to let me know what's going on. They're already feeling like, oh my gosh, I just realized my child's failing. I should not have ignored all those emails that I automatically get from the system. I should have been checking my student's progress. And instead, you're just reflecting. You're not saying you agree or disagree with option B, which is one of the great things about reflection. You're just saying you feel that you could have used more communication for them to go, yeah, I really could have, blah, 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 blah. I needed this. And then as they start exploring that, you're able to find solutions together. And that's what reflection lets happen. So let's
Yeah,
do
and
one more.
I think another thing to note, Ashley, for option A, that is a true statement.
Very true.
Okay. And so it's not about it being true or untrue. And I don't believe that the teacher did anything wrong that actually did option A, that sent those emails, right? Again, what we're trying to do is reflect what we're hearing from the parent in this particular scenario. We're not trying to justify that what we did was right, or that maybe we were wrong for not doing what the parent's asking. We're just trying to reflect back what we're hearing from the parent in order to make that connection so that we can then partner in moving forward.
All right, so let's try out another one. A parent arrives to an IEP meeting very upset. They state that the students' accommodations have not been met and threaten to take this to the California Department of Education for a violation of FAPE. How many of you have been in those meetings where they're starting to talk about going to the Department of Education? You can either say A, I hear you saying that you feel Johnny needed more support this semester. Can you tell me a little bit more about what areas you're concerned with? Or you can say, we have provided all of the IEP services for Johnny. Here are the dates and times of each service. Right. Honest answer. Raise your hand if in meetings you've been prone to saying option B sometimes. I've been there. I've been there with parents where I said, "We met with your kid on this, and this date for therapy. We met for these goals." Because, like
Oh,
John said, option A and option B are both true statements.
mhm. But one is going to definitely facilitate connection and the ability to um, limit defensiveness, even though they're both true statements. And then the other one is only going to kind of fan, these embers of opposition and contentiousness.
Mhm. Not to say that dates and times aren't great to have. If a parent asks for them, we want to provide them. If you do find yourself in due process, it is really important to have those dates and
Yes.
times. But if you can have that conversation with that parent, maybe we don't get to, further meetings.
Okay. Again, which response best uses reflection? Before a high intensity IEP meeting, a teacher says, I'm not going to come today. I am not going to sit in there with that parent telling lies about me. I don't care if it pisses them off even more. And this is probably a realistic scenario, I would imagine. I know that with a lot of the teachers that I worked with at risk youth, you meet the parents and you were kind of like, okay, I have a little bit better understanding now why this kid is a challenge, right? Once you meet the parent, there are some things that become a little bit more obvious, but nonetheless, you have to partner with them. So, based on this scenario, which is the best use of reflection? Option A, it sounds like you're feeling very upset about this upcoming meeting and really don't want to interact with this parent. Can you share some specific concerns you have for this meeting? Or option B, I know this parent is difficult, but you have to be there. You'll need to share with the team the services that you've been providing Jane.
All right. So I see the answers coming in. And
Yep.
again, option B is still true,
Mhm.
but it's not probably what your teacher needs to hear in that moment, right? Your
Right.
teacher needs to hear that support. Your teacher needs to get it out off their chest before they have to come in there and smile and play
Yep.
nice
And
in the sandbox.
and
And we have to
option
be that
B,
person.
yep, option B only focuses on the words. It doesn't focus on the emotion. And so remember that active listening and reflection deal with not just the words, but also the emotions that are behind them. And so that's what differentiates our options here.
Yeah. And I would also just word of caution because I've been there. When we tell teachers you have to be there and we don't make sure that they are emotionally ready to be there, I have seen it not go so well and teachers leave meetings, crying or upset or losing their cool. And then we have a teacher that's usually awesome that's just in something that we have to address. So we want to make sure we can get them in a good place
Mhm.
first. So, your job as program specialist is not only to do active listening in these high intensity meetings, but to help your teachers also engage in active listening. So, we wanted to talk about some ways to facilitate that within the staff at your schools. And number one is going to be modeling it in meetings with families, but also one on one. When you are talking with them, really let them see these skills. Let them see you paying attention to your nonverbal cues. Let them see you using reflection and the emotions behind it. Do trainings on it. So they're going to be getting the same training. But you can also have it be something that you just bring up every single meeting and do practice as a group, do a case study. Then number one, I think is most important is normalizing the struggles. We all get it wrong sometimes. So if you notice that they're not actively listening, you notice that they are just naturally not the best listeners in the world, and we all know some people like that, really help them develop those skills, normalize that it may not be coming naturally to them, and help them practice versus, oh, you just have to learn to do this. Because it is a skill that can be learned.
And there have been times where I've been working with staff and I've recognized that I'm not being the best active listener, and I will actually address it during the conversation and say, you know what, I haven't done the best job of making sure I'm understanding you right now. Can we take a step back and go over this again? And it's okay to do that, both as a supervisor, as a trainer, as a parent. I do it with my kids a lot, right? I haven't done this the best. Let me go back and see if I can do this again. And it gives people, I think, the freedom to be human and to be fallible. And your teachers, I know, at the end of the day, will appreciate, right? Just the ability to be human in these situations.
So now we're going to do another breakout group. And in the breakout group, I want you for group A. So we're going to be in slightly bigger groups this time. Group A will have John in it. And then group B, I will probably join, but we will probably have some of our other therapy team members that are here, Kathy and Andrea. So I want you to read the scenario, and I want you to come up with a poor example of active listening and reflection, and one response that's a good example. So, all right, I think we have everyone back now. So group A, Johnny enters the IEP meeting defensive and belligerent. He states that these meetings are stupid and that teachers don't care about him and don't want to help him. They only want to keep assigning him work he can't do. So, what was the positive reflection, John, since you said that was the easiest one?
Yeah, it was. I think Johnny, we hear you saying that this is a difficult meeting, and that they might not even make sense to you, but we really want to make sure that we have an understanding of what it is that's going on, and kind of know what it is that you're thinking about things. And I probably worded that really poorly based on what Bill said, but that was kind of the gist of it. He did a really good job of reflecting back.
What about a negative response? Did y'all ever get to one or anything off the top of your head?
Yeah, some of the negative responses were, focusing on, well, hey, Johnny, these meetings are required. And I know that, you might think that they're stupid, but the teachers do care about you, and they aren't assigning you any more work than they're assigning the other students in the class, which are all true statements, right? But they certainly aren't positive reflections of what Johnny's saying and how Johnny's feeling.
Yeah, great examples. Or even worse, I hear a lot of the lose that attitude, young man, or we don't use the word stupid around here, right? Instead of really focusing on, wow, why are you feeling like it's work that you
Right.
can't do? That must feel pretty, bad. All right, group B. Miss Parker enters the meeting in a rush. She says she is short on time and hopes this is over with fast, as she already has enough on her plate, and this will be one more thing. As the family is set to arrive, she opens her laptop and sits with a grimace. How are you going to handle this, teacher? What is a positive reflection, group B?
So our group really talked about meeting Miss Parker where she was at and just validating the fact that there are a lot of things that teachers are responsible for doing, and making sure that we hear those and we let her know, like, we understand that this is another thing added to your plate, but really emphasizing like the value of her input, and then trying to kind of ask how we could make how her input there and her time there could be best spent. So just kind of covering those bases.
Okay, awesome. So that is the end of our time today. I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the chat box to our post test. So you can go ahead and click on that, and a post test should come up. Please do this because it really makes it helpful for us if we can get both the post test and pre test from you. It makes a difference. Is everybody able to pull that up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's
And then
really
while
a
you
way
do that,
that we can actively listen to the feedback you're giving us, and cover things that maybe we didn't cover as well as we wanted to. So
yep. And one more challenge as you all sign off. Go and talk to a teacher today. Go and talk to even one of your coworkers today and ask them what's been toughest for them in the last year of teaching, and just practice some of these reflection and active listening skills, and try your best to really look at not only the content but the feeling and intensity behind it, because if we practice, we're going to do a lot better at those meetings. But thank you so much. If you need the link again or you have any questions, John and I are happy to stay on and answer any of them you may have.
otherwise, thank y'all very much.